You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Sometimes organizations or leaders unknowingly display certain behaviors that is discriminatory, but the intention is not.
So where exactly does it stop becoming a joke? Because some people might say, I was just joking.
Sometimes even in the informal setting, you still have to watch out. It still sets a perception of you and where your values or where your thoughts lie.
How do you deal with the retaliation or the repercussions?
So retaliation at times are real, all right? I kid you not.
Hello again, it's Tiffany and Gerald on the Work It podcast. We like to see ourselves as your workplace friends, here to help navigate some of the thorniest questions you have surrounding your careers. And we hope you feel the same way as well. So let us know if you have any feedback or questions that we can answer for you. We're at cnapodcasts@mediacorp.com.sg.
And right at the end of this main conversation, we have an Ask Me Anything segment where we take a work-related question that you sent to us. So Tiffany, what's the question for today?
Today's AMA question is really, I think, kind of tricky. It's about how to give professional feedback, not the good kind, to a friend who happens to work with you. And that was sent in by Kay. So stay to the end to hear what Kay is going through and the advice that we can give him.
All right. So since we are talking about tricky work situations that people face, I thought I would ask you, Tiffany, about your thoughts about workplace discrimination. To you, how does workplace discrimination look like?
I would say there would be some form of power dynamics involved where somebody who is of a higher level may be taking away certain opportunities from you. It could be sometimes even in the small talk. It makes you feel that this person doesn't value you as an equal. Yeah. What about you? I mean, have you seen workplace discrimination happen around you before?
I agree with you, Tiffany, because most of the time we know it's there.
Yeah.
It's just very hard to recognize.
Yes.
It's also quite prevalent.
Like you feel it, but how do you pinpoint that this is it?
Exactly. So to help us pinpoint that, to draw some really clear lines around what is discrimination at workplace and what is not as well, we have Alvin Goh with us today. He's the Executive Director of the SHRI, Singapore Human Resources Institute. Welcome, Alvin, to the show.
Hi, Gerald. Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Alvin, I want to start with defining what is workplace discrimination. Is it very clear-cut?
I think it's, to some extent, it's quite subjective, right? As you said, there must be a level of power play involved as well. But sometimes organizations or leaders themselves unknowingly display certain behaviors that is discriminatory, but the intention is not. But the impact, or as you clearly put it, the felt fairness, it seems that it's discriminatory. Let me give you an example. It's very common in the workplace that high potential executives, those who can, do more. And it could be perceived as discrimination, especially if you have a high potential program that is not disclosed versus a open concept one. And when certain bosses or leaders put you on projects, certain assignments, or give you a special task and so forth, that could be seen as, hey, discriminating against me whereby I'm giving more work than my fellow colleagues, right? So again, that's very subjective. But there's also the outright discrimination relating to the protected characteristics, like age, gender, nationality, race, abilities, and so forth.
Yeah.
And those will be very clearly outright. Sometimes it's very common also to see in the workplace what the industry call microaggression.
Okay, so for example?
So for example, it's like passing a comment on race.
Okay.
Or passing a comment on gender. Saying like things like, for example, all women can multitask and men can't. That can be perceived as positive and also negative at times.
That's true, depending on the person who's listening to it.
Exactly. And also the behavior that is actually put forth in terms of the context and the content. I think all this must come into play. Body language, tonality of how I convey that messaging could be perceived as discriminatory at times.
So where exactly does it stop becoming a joke? Because some people might say, I was just joking. Because we don't want to get to this stage as well where even in the workplace, we don't feel comfortable in joking with our colleagues because at that point of time, maybe the relationship has kind of evolved to become more of a friend, like a workplace friend. And then the other person may be a bit more sensitive.
Yeah.
So how do we know when we have crossed that line?
So number one is pattern. Is there a pattern whereby the frequency is over and over again, whereby you keep joking about it? And that's where you clearly pointed out there's a level of sensitivity that it crosses the tipping point, is what I always call it. And that should be withheld. But in all fairness, in the corporate environment, we should always refrain from joking about race, gender, religion, and all this aside, because After all, we want to have that professional decorum in the workplace. I think that's very important. So jokes around such areas should be avoided or refrained. Unless you're in a social context, you're just having a friendly banter. I think that's all right, but don't take it too far and it becomes a regular habit or pattern itself. And that becomes a worrying sign.
So the frequency,
Yeah,
right?
the frequency and the pattern of what's being said, I think is very important. I agree with you. And I even will say that sometimes even in the informal setting, you still have to watch out.
Exactly.
Because I know those conversations over drinks, sometimes people remember and then they bring it back into the office and they say, this person is always been saying these sort of things outside of the office. It still sets a perception of you and where your values or where your thoughts lie. And then you don't want to have this type of thing stick to you in the workplace because it's about professionalism. I think these are some of the perspectives that you don't have to articulate in any setting.
So you mentioned about things that are very clear, the clear lines that we shouldn't cross. But what are some forms of not so clear types of discrimination where we sometimes see in a workplace?
For example, your employee is having a hard day and getting ready to go off work and you all of a sudden you pause certain things and say, oh, please get this done and I need it by today itself, 5 or 6, right? And you portray that it's a do or die type of a document that you need to be processed and everything. And it's deliberately done, right? The key thing here is that there must be a sense of deliberateness whereby the leader or the manager actually purposely or deliberately does it to the employee, right? And I think that's the areas that we don't see very clearly, but it exists in the workplaces.
Because the leader might go, it's my job to delegate tasks and I feel that you are the right person for the job. So then you can't even say that's discriminatory or like you are targeting me, right? Because it's a he say, she say type of situation.
So these are the areas that are extremely subjective. And as you clear point, it's a I say, you say, or somebody saw it kind of thing. And that's the element that we are trying to advocate for leaders, especially to be mindful of such behaviors and to refrain from such behaviors, especially in workplaces whereby we know here in corporate Singapore that stress elements are pretty high. There's an element whereby today, a lot of us are caregivers at homes. We're also sole breadwinners and so forth. So there are multi areas whereby it stresses the employee out. And workplace burnout, workplace well-being is a very important concept that we also need to take into the equation, right? And I do see in my previous employers and even the work that SHI does, there is always this microaggression, this micro-discriminatory behaviors that exist. And it's very hard, as you clear point, to pinpoint that's not right. But the key thing is that how do we become more humanizing in our workplace? I think that's the thing that we're trying to put forth in the corporate environment.
Yeah, I mean, Alvin, you talked about how leaders should be more mindful. And I like how you brought in even the wellness perspective, not just of discrimination, right? But as an employee, sometimes when you face these microaggressions or these behaviors, it's really very difficult to bring them up. A lot of the people that I've spoken to, they often resort to, just leave the job. Maybe I can go to a better place. This place is too toxic for me, right? That's the language that they always use. It's quite a shame because maybe the person's a good performer, right? And there were a lot of track record that's there being left behind. So in terms of how individual employees can respond or they can call out, what are some of the best practices or things that you have seen from your experience?
So under the Workplace Fairness Legislation, WFL, in fact, companies must have a grievance policy and a whistleblowing policy. Some large organizations do have a whistleblowing policy in place, whereby they allow employees to surface up certain grievances that they have, certain discriminatory or workplace areas like harassment and everything up to the respective departments. It could be internal audits, it could be the legal department or HR department as well. Right? So there are policies in place today. I would like to think that more than not, companies have already adopted orders itself.
So these are anonymous or do you have to put in your name if you're making a complaint?
You need not put in your name, but these functions, right, these departments, legal, HR or internal audits and everything, when a moment the employee surface up, of course, let's say it's via email, the organization will know who the complainant is itself, right? Who the victim is, and also who the actor or aggressor is in this case. And if it warrants an investigation, then that department will then, usually it will be the HR or legal, will then take on that role of investigating the accuracy of this complaint. Right?
Okay.
And there are policies that very clearly stated the certain guidelines like within 5 working days, 7 working days, I will get back to you and everything. And these are good practices, not to become a, I call it FOC, full of complaints type of organization.
Okay.
All right. But it's progressive. It creates a safe environment that the employees know that, hey, look, there's an avenue for me to raise up any grievances that I might have.
But it requires so much courage from the person who is at the receiving end of this kind of behavior to lodge a complaint. The Manpower Ministry recently put out the Fair Employment Practices Report 2023, and it shows that actually more people are not seeking help when they feel discriminated, when they compare 2023 to 2022. So a lot of them are saying that they fear the repercussions, they fear the retaliation. Because one of the things that we have talked about in previous episodes is if you are in a small team and you face discriminatory behavior from your boss, you make that complaint. I think it's quite easy for the boss to figure out who among your team members is the one who made the complaint. So how do you deal with the retaliation or the repercussions that come along the way?
So retaliation at times are real, all right? I kid you not. And therefore, employees would then take a backseat and say, I need to protect my rice bowl, right? But the problem again in what we are seeing is that when such behaviors happen, when you don't lodge a complaint whereby it's a real discriminatory or workplace bullying issue, then you are allowing the perpetrator to get away scot-free. And that behavior will then morph into what I call a toxic environment or toxic workplace. And it does the organization no good, right? So what I've seen as best practices, some of the organizations have done are that leadership commitment, education and training, right? A no tolerance policy on retaliation. These are some of the best practices out there. And it takes a lot of the CEO or the MD or the senior management to say these are not tolerable. These are out of bounds areas. And they educate. They send their line managers for training. They send their employees, making sure that they're clear on the policies, getting the HR departments and so forth to articulate how employees could lodge a grievance and so forth. And on top of that, while internal resolution is best, there are also the external platforms, like for example, to TADM, even to MOM and stuff like that, that employees who feel that if they think that internally is not being addressed correctly, they can also lodge it to the regulators.
Can I just follow up? How does the policy of zero tolerance for retaliation look like? Let's say, for example, this is my manager I'm talking about, right? They are humans as well. And obviously, it feels very personal. It's an attack on this person. And if after investigation, the company has said, okay, it's just good for both parties to talk it over, it's not that bad. And then now you have to go back to work with your manager. How does the zero tolerance to retaliation look like?
So to support zero tolerance, that's where the progressive disciplinary processes come into play. From counseling of the supervisor. Sometimes the supervisor might not be knowing that he or she is performing or displaying such behavior. So we will start with counseling of the supervisors, verbal warning, first letter of warnings, second letter, then maybe termination and dismissal. So these are the progressive disciplinary acts or policies that companies could actually adopt. And I see best sometimes whereby interventions are done at the counseling stage before allowing any developing situations from becoming a huge issue for the organization, right? Some companies have got, as I said, very transparent policies and they address this right at the start, right? Not allowing such areas to blow out of proportion. I think that's very important. By the time it blows out of proportion, organizations as a whole suffers from productivity issues because employees are not happy, resignations could be higher, attrition rate could be higher. And on top of that, there's also the reputation risk that one could actually look into.
Okay, but after step one, if everything is resolved, everybody says sorry to each other, everything is cleared, then you have to go back to work with your manager. How?
I think there will be a moment of
awkwardness.
I don't disagree with you, right? But I think it takes a level of professional from the supervisor or the leadership perspective to actually want to make sure that my behavior, it's aligned to your values and making sure that I will create that safe environment for open professional discussion.
If as the leader, it was really truly a misunderstanding, you also feel apologetic about that. And then you would be a bit more cautious that maybe your words were not taken as a joke. And in that way, you will put yourself in that person's shoes rather than see it as, why did you attack me? Why did you complain about me? Now it's my turn to get back at you, even though I had said sorry beforehand.
And I see this a lot of cases, not only from first-time leaders, but across the board, right? The reason is because when we develop leaders, their leadership qualities are not developed at the start. There's a lot of emphasis on technical trainings. It's only when we see this person seems to be able to perform well, and therefore I'm considering you for a bigger job or leadership role. And that's when I start thinking about your development as a leader. But by the time it's somewhat too late, and how many companies out there really have that mindset? in terms of developing leaders for the future.
Yeah, I agree with Alvin about the supervisors themselves, the leaders themselves. They need proper training. And not everyone who is a good performer is a good leader, right? And when it comes to this thing about discrimination and how do you work with each other, when we talked a lot about how it's like the policies of it, like how do we deal with it, the penalties, and I'm just wondering whether is there a space for discourse for people to come together to talk about what has happened before it leads to escalation of the policy.
So before you complain to HR, can you all talk about it first?
For the person who feels discriminated against to go to that leader and just, have the conversation like what's happening.
But you need psychological safety first, right?
Yeah, but because if it affects you that much, it's also very hard for you to go to the policy because
you probably
your
don't
job's on the line anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, today if I were to flip the roles around, if I'm the leader, maybe I would prefer the person to come and speak to me first, right? Because Alvin was saying some leaders, they don't know. It's a blind spot.
Yes.
And they would really appreciate having the employee come and speak to them first. And maybe even that was a good chance to call them out.
Yeah.
Without public shaming.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Let them have that step down first, right?
Yeah, because if today they are really in a category of leaders who are not properly trained, it's also technically not their fault. They didn't have the right experiences or the right knowledge to handle this sort of things. They're not aware, blind spots. So maybe having that one-to-one conversation first. Both parties have to be mature about it, not just the leader, right? Even the employee, you have to be professional about it to bring up what you're feeling uncomfortable about. Then you have that space for discussion. And then if it gets worse, then you activate the red button.
Yeah. It's good that you brought up that point because I think it segues very nicely to my next question, which is what if my company doesn't have a proper channel for me to make a complaint and I feel that I need to press that red button. I cannot talk to my leader anymore face to face. Then what can I do?
There is the external parties, external platforms like MOM or even to
TAFAP as well, right? Yeah.
and so forth to actually put that formal official. But at the same time, if employees out there who feels that they've been aggrieved and there are evidence to suggest so, feel free to reach out to SHI itself, right?
So you guys can help with mediation.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's needed a lot more
Yes.
than the penalty.
Yeah,
It's the
exactly.
mediation.
So mediation is very important, right?
Yeah.
Don't go towards the serious side of the disciplinary process. Counseling, mediation is always the best port of call, I feel.
When can you make it a legal case without burning bridges, especially if the industry is very small?
The thing that I always say, right? Never do the wrong thing right,
Never do the wrong thing right. Okay.
right?
Explain.
So to me, is this. If there's really concrete material evidence that it's a very serious workplace bullying or harassment case, then please do the right thing
Okay.
and lodge it. Because you will never know the perpetrator's extent.
True. You might not be the only victim.
Exactly. In fact, voicing out might curtail these behaviors earlier on and not allowing the perpetrator or the aggressor to have his or her own way, right? And destroying the corporate culture that leaders are trying so hard to build. Being a safe environment, being a good workplace environment and so forth. So therefore, I always say, please don't do the wrong thing right by withholding orders or for fear of burning bridges. If your companies are very progressive and if it's the perpetrator is found to be very aggressive and found material evidence and so forth, then the companies themselves must do the right thing right. And therefore, if it warrants a termination or dismissal of the aggressor, then so be it, right? Today's social media is very loud.
Yeah.
And imagine if an employee who's been aggrieved and the grievances are not addressed. Social media is a platform that will kill your reputation.
That's true. So you have to take every complaint seriously.
Exactly.
Investigate it properly. Make sure that you're fair to both parties as well.
Exactly.
Right.
Correct.
I think these are I would say, very serious cases. And like we said at the start of this podcast, most of the cases that we are seeing are subjective, very small types of ways that it's like, I think this person is discriminating against me. But these are things that I don't have evidence for.
So I think there's a lot of work to be done. Organizations need to have policies in place, procedures in place, but more so importantly, continuously to inculcate a inclusive culture. Right? I think that's very important. Also develop future leaders. I always bring this quote that our late founding father, Mr. Lee, said. And this is what he said. He has never seen a man or woman just by attending a leadership program become a leader overnight. So if I read his words very closely, it means that leadership development is an ongoing journey, right? And we will never know. Even for me as ED or SHRI, for me, my leadership journey is a continuous process. I think it's important to have that mindset. Then progressive people practices can then be in place into our organization.
Yeah, it really starts with the leader being open looking at every experience as a form of development. Even the feedback that's given by the staff can be seen an area of growth as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Since we're on the topic of leaders, so from a manager's perspective, what if I feel that this particular staff is not really a good fit for the job? So I don't give them as many tasks, or I give them the task that's not too urgent. But this person claims that I'm discriminating him or her. How do I deal with that?
So then you have to understand, why is that staff or the employee not a good fit to deliver on those tasks? Most of the time, what I see is a trust issue. And to me, trust has got three elements. Whether the employee itself has got the competencies, skill sets, and knowledge to do the job. The intention of the employee, whether he's a team player or otherwise. And finally, whether this employee itself is reliable. Trust in the workplace between employer and employee takes time to be built. And I think if you address all these three issues, starting from the employer's perspective to build competencies, I think that over time, that employee will then be able to take on those tasks that you mentioned yourself, rather than saying, oh, because you are not able to do it, therefore I'm not going to give you this important role itself. Look, every employee is an asset to the organization, right? Yes, they are high performers and they are good performers, right? And of course, sometimes they're average performers. As I always say, as we move the bell curve to the right, please never forget the people on the left of the bell curve. And that's where development takes place. Even our high potentials one day, if you don't develop them, you don't take care of them, one day as we move the bell curve to the right, they will end up being people on the left. Right? I think that's the mindset that organizations must take on.
I think it takes a lot of explanation and communication, very clear communication on why certain things are being withheld, why certain decisions are made, so that the employees, they don't feel like these are signals of like discrimination or maybe even quiet firing kind of signals. I think a leader would need to explain clearly why are certain things being done.
Yes.
So that at least you set the record straight.
One of the things that we are talking about here, I think is very key, is that we've got to treat the workplace as a human place rather than treat people as numbers to achieve your goals. You have to put your people first. I mean, if anybody who's listening in at this point of time and they come to this point of time where they go, okay, I can identify signs that I've been discriminated, I hope that they would feel empowered enough to do something, maybe speak to their leaders first, the person who maybe is the perpetrator, or maybe their leader who is of a safe space. They can talk to them about it, tell them this is how I've been feeling, this is what I've seen. Air it with somebody else as well, right? To see whether are you sensitive.
Yes, to see whether are you just over-imagining things.
Yes, correct. Because you don't want to escalate it and then for people to say, actually, there was nothing. And then you also feel like, oh, okay, then maybe the next time it happens again, you start second-guessing yourself. So check in with somebody first. And if in doubt, there are always, places that you can seek help from, whether is it within or outside of your company. So thank you so much, Alvin, for coming on and sharing this clear insight to us.
Thank you.
Most welcome. Thank you very much.
Hi, we're back with another AMA question, so let's dive in. Today's question was sent in by our listener, Kay. It was quite a long one, so I actually wrote back and asked Kay more follow-up questions. Well, in a nutshell, Kay is working with somebody who doesn't work well in a team. Several examples he gave is that this person showed prejudice towards another colleague, created a fearful workspace for a female co-worker, and he doesn't stick to commitments or mutually agreed work schedules. Sometimes he even doesn't show up for work. Well, the problem is, here's the kicker, he's friends with the director and the co-founder of the company. But get this, okay, so many twists. The leadership has decided that he isn't a good fit for the company and they are planning to let him go. However, it's a small company with only 6 people, no HR. Everyone is worried that he won't receive the firing news that well. They're concerned that now the friendship is on the line, and so Kay wants to know, how can they navigate this situation?
Wow, this is a really very long
Very
AMA.
drama.
Yeah, very drama-filled.
Yeah.
But I think right off the cuff, the people in this company, they did the right thing to decide that this person is not a good fit. Worrying about the friendship, I think it shouldn't be that big of a deal in that case. I think we have to always understand that when we run a business, the business interest comes first.
Yes.
Right? And the performance of every member, especially in a small team, it matters a lot. Everyone has to pull their weight. So if you have someone who's a bit dysfunctional, causing problems, not committed to the work, causing difficulties for others, in a small team, right, it's like a very big impact to them.
I think also there's nothing wrong to be working with a friend or working for your friend. But I think it's also important to be very clear about your boundaries.
Yeah.
There is a professional side as well as a personal side.
Yeah. for the leader, the founder, right, who's friends with this person, you really have to ask yourself, take it upon yourself to say that firstly, maybe this is not a good fit. You have to take on the responsibility to communicate the news clearly, to maybe discuss the settlement options and how to best announce and communicate the departure so that you kind of leave everyone a little bit of space.
Yeah.
So that everyone can kind of emerge from this feeling better about the situation itself.
Yes.
At the same time also, as a co-founder, you may have to just admit to the rest of us that this was a bad hire.
Correct. Maybe your hiring decision was flawed in the first place.
Yeah.
But instead of dragging this on, you need to cut your losses as soon as possible.
Yeah. So I was wondering, why would they worry about this?
Because I think they feel that, okay, number one, their friendship is at stake. So what if this person stops becoming your friend? So my understanding is that this person could be a good friend. A good friend, but not necessarily a good worker or a good colleague.
Yeah.
But I think if you are the founder of the company, it's important to think for your company at this point of time because that's the hat that you need to wear.
Yeah.
If this person, like Kay was saying, has already overstepped so many boundaries, including making that female co-worker feel unsafe, think about it. If the female co-worker decides to escalate this, take it to Ministry of Manpower or to lodge a police complaint, that will reflect very badly on the company. So the company's reputation will be at stake. And at the end of the day, you are the business owner. You need to take care of not just your bottom line, but your rest of your workers as well. Yeah. So you don't want any of these situations to escalate beyond what it is at this stage.
Yeah. Even when you mentioned earlier that this company doesn't have HR. So maybe the way they did the recruitment can improve.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't just bring in on your friends. You really have to bring on someone who's competent enough and who's also able to fit into a team, especially if it's a small team of 6 people. You
That's
really
true.
need someone to fit in like a glove. So the advice I'm thinking now for people who run their business or who have a small team and then you're looking to bring in your friends, please don't bring somebody just because he or she is your friend. You should really assess carefully their fit and their competency for the work, the commitment to the work as well, so that you can protect your friendship. If you're not confident of that, don't bring in the friend.
Yeah. And if this person who you have to fire, who is a friend, is threatening to cut off the friendship, then so be it. I think there's not much you can do if the person doesn't act maturely and be able to see it as a clear separation of personal and professional.
Yeah.
So, Kay, here's hoping that you and your bosses would be able to make the right decision, do the right thing, but also at the same time deliver the news in a way that I guess would be a win-win situation for everyone. If, like Kay, you have a work-related question, do write in to us. We're at cnapodcasts@mediacorp.com.sg. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube, where a video version of this is at. The team behind the Work It podcast is Crispina Robert, Joanne Chan, Junaini Johari, Saye Win, and Arjun Bala. Sound mixing is by Carrie Lim. Video by Hanina Amin.
I'm Gerald.
And I'm Tiffany. Have a good work week ahead.